Today, I have the honor of introducing you all to Professor Harry Joel. My first ever transatlantic adventure came about thanks to him. It started when he came to one of my freshman seminars at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire to talk about his research, the same topic he'll be sharing with us today. At the seminar, he mentioned that any interested students could email him for more information. Well, I thought Jewish history in Europe was a pretty fascinating topic, and to be honest, I needed to find something to do in the summer. So I emailed him, and eventually I was invited to join a research team along with 3 other students for a 3-week stay in Lithuania. This experience remains, more than 5 years later, one of the highlights of my life. It was the ultimate example of interdisciplinarity, given that each of us students had diverse research interests and specializations, but one thing we had in common was a great mentor, Harry Joel. Harry earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from Simon Fraser University and PhD from the University of Calgary. He was a Killam postdoctoral fellow at the University of Calgary, followed by a 2-year NSERC postdoctoral fellow at Simon Fraser University. He's currently a professor in the Department of Geography and Anthropology at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire and is a fellow of the Geological Society of America. Harry has conducted research with ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, at more than 1,400 sites in North America, Europe, Israel, China, New Zealand, Australia, and, super cool, Antarctica. He has a broad background in the earth sciences, particularly geomorphology, stratigraphy, and geoarchaeology. Research with colleagues has resulted in numerous conference presentations and publications, including 3 co-edited GPR volumes. His research has been highlighted by multiple news outlets, such as the New York Times, CNN, and Fox Science News, as well as documentaries including BBC and Nova. And with that, Harry, we're so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Chloe. Good to see you virtually. I'm going to bring and hopefully I did that the right way around. But you're not, I'm going to stop share, do it another way. And every time it's different. Oh. Any hints with your Zoom? My Zoom worked fine. I know what I'll do. You over here. This will finally get there. There we go. I think that's there. All right. What I'm talking about tonight, the title talking about mapping historic sites in Lithuania, and as part of our Holocaust mapping program that we've been doing. Hopefully this comes across.
I remember him as the good German.
He was very, very isolated and afraid that the SS would find out that his intention is to save them.
why would a Nazi major be protecting and saving Jews when the rest of the Germans in Vilna were committed to slaughtering them?
HKP is unique. It's a killing field where people are still living.
We're trying to locate a mass burial site.
You can identify where things happen without having to excavate.
We were hiding underneath the wall. They were taking the children to be killed, and I was saved on top of the roof.
This could be where the hole was that extended down under the foundation and into this space.
We have two distinct pits here. It's highly likely that there are still bodies in that area.
This is where they hid 100 people packed into these footings.
That's all we could hear was crying, screaming, machine gun, silence.
That's one of the films that's been done on some of our work. As Chloe indicated, it's very interdisciplinary, right? I am not a filmmaker. I'm not a director. I teach within the sciences. But we collaborate with a lot of different people. And these are some of our collaborators within Lithuania. We also have funding for students from some local funding agencies, as well as in-country partners, because it's not cheap to put these programs on. Is the students are fully funded to go on these programs, and it's one of these programs where we have a very diverse student population going. Many students have never been on a plane, don't have a passport, have never thought about going overseas, because everything is about Western Wisconsin. And I think it doesn't matter where you go in the country, I think people can relate to that. And what the students have done here is that they really have taxed themselves and said, we want unique experiences as part of our education. And some of that money by the Student Senate, this is not a faculty staff initiative, this is a student initiative that said we would like to have an international research experience. And so I've run multiple of these all over the world. This is one from last summer in New Zealand. And it covers 100% of the travel costs of going overseas. And this program has won multiple awards in the United States for the vision of the program itself as we go through. And so here's actually Chloe arriving in the airport with several of the colleagues there. And from there, we take a look at different issues. And this is Wisconsin. We've had a 482% increase in anti-Semitic incidents from 2015 to 2020. And if you take the latest statistics, that's only increased to just under 500%. But in the bottom right is the graduating class from a local city where I'm from, right? Where the whole class is doing the Nazi salute, and that's okay. That is not okay. That's 2 years ago. And so that is the sentiment, right, that we are dealing with. Wisconsin just legislated that you need to teach about the Holocaust, because up to a year ago, you didn't have to teach about the Holocaust in any of the schools here. And so there is this idea of what is the Holocaust. That is not an unusual question. So how did we get involved? We've done a fair amount of work in different areas. This is in Rhodes, Greece, where we're investigating a synagogue that was bombed by the Allies. In this region. Right beside this is a Protestant church that was blown up at the same time. But you can imagine people going to either the synagogue or to the church, walking down as friends, and then say, okay, we'll see you later. I'm going to my services, you're going to your services, and then walking out at the end and, selling things at the market and things like that. From here, we noticed these kinds of signs. You're in the roads, right? You're in the middle of nowhere, really. I mean, when it comes down to it, you're far away from World War II. And the Jews here had no idea that they were going to be some of the last Jews to be killed that came into this region. And so at conferences we were presenting, we were talking about the Jews of Rhodes, Greece. And a colleague of ours was talking about the Holocaust and the Jews of Vilnius, Lithuania. And he said, you're looking at synagogues. Do you think you could find a synagogue in Vilnius, Lithuania? And United States was interested in this because of funneling some funding for students, but also to put science in the Baltic states at a time when you've got the Russian neighbors right nearby. And so having some of that American influences that. And as you saw in the bio, I'm a Canadian, and so approaching our embassies as well. Where is Lithuania? We've already had conversations about this. I was fascinated by some of the discussions earlier this morning that related to similar things that we are talking about when we go to the Baltic states. And so students arrive, and some of them like, wow, that was a long airplane ride. I didn't know it was that far. To now arriving and said, don't they speak English here? And then some of these conversations that go on in these regions. And so we get settled in, and then we go for a little walk, and that walk takes a look at the only remaining synagogue, the Choral Synagogue within Vilnius. And we have to remember, Vilnius was the Jerusalem of the North. We still have libraries at the Evo in New York City that the remains of many places here are stored there. And it's a prominent institute within the United States now. But you walk from there and you walk down these streets. And as a scientist, I learned stuff in the social structures in the talks earlier today. But why am I walking down a street in Vilnius, Lithuania in 2024? And these are where the Jewish families lived in the Holocaust in the 1940s, right? How are cities trying to deal with this or not deal with this? Because this is today. And I got these questions of why are there concerns? Why are these areas not being worked on? And we work with the Jewish associations there. We've had conversations with them. Reparations are going on now, right? Just started this past year. And so as we walk through these communities, and this is hard to do when you're in the North America, this is, now Starbucks is on the left-hand side, and you got all the big stores there. But what we're looking down in the 1940s was the gate to the ghetto. And that's the way it would have looked like at that time period. And then you could go to other streets, and it's, a very busy European, I love European cities, right? Very busy, you can sit outside. But these are the maps on the walls now. Right? This is all about Holocaust tourism. Where can you direct the tourists to go look at locations that are related to the Holocaust? And there are coach buses that are coming to these regions to take a look at this. So let's first of all take a look at the Great Synagogue, right? This is a place that was very well recognized by leaders in Eastern Europe. All the leaders came to this synagogue because it was one of those majestic buildings that you wanted as a leader of the country to come here, right, and take a look at this. But you do notice that the synagogue could not build above any Christian church. It had to be below that Christian church, and you can see the steeples behind it. So what this Jewish synagogue did when they built it, they built down. And they built a couple floors downwards, and you can see coming into the synagogue, everyone has to walk down into the location. And so the question is, where is this place now, right? Because we know that during the Second World War, the Nazis used it as a storage depot, destroyed much of it. The Soviets came in and completely demolished it, and then they built a school on top of it. So when we arrive at this location, this is what we have. We got little kids running around, playing at recess. And the idea is that there is a synagogue below this, or that's the idea. And so what we do is we work with our local, there's John Seligman and the students, and he's explaining the problem and what we're trying to do, and we're doing some brief excavations. And we start using the tool that I mostly use, so amongst many others, but it's ground penetrating radar. And I often will use GPR as a short form, but for many state budgets, that's general purpose revenue, and that can be problematic as we go through. And so we're emitting an electromagnetic pulse, right? And you're dealing with, if you've got a cell phone, you're dealing with electromagnetic pulses all the time. And we're recording those echoes in the subsurface, and we're building an image of the subsurface from what's coming up below us. And so we worked with many science programs. NOVA has done a little clip here, and I'll let that play showing what GPR is.
John Seligman suspects the mikveh is under the playground. For the archaeological team, it is an appealing target.
Mikvahs are great places to excavate because people lose all their personal items when they're going into the bath.
Recovering this lost world is a personal mission for many on the team. Lithuanian archaeologists, Israeli volunteers, American students.
For me personally, my goal is to be able to contribute to mankind and be able to say that I did something.
With no clues visible from the surface, the search for the mikveh begins with a technology known as ground-penetrating radar. Harry Joel is the team's GPR expert.
The ground penetrating radar, or known as GPR, uses FM radio waves, just like we're listening to in the car here. We're actually putting those waves into the ground. They're reflecting off of surfaces, and that's what we're seeing in the radar.
By measuring how quickly the signals are reflected back to the unit, GPR can reveal features in the ground that don't look natural.
Particularly in archaeological, you're looking for those right corners. Nothing in nature builds anything with a right corner. And so we can figure out a feature that has a right corner. We can say, oh, that's a building, that's human.
With scanning complete, the data is sent to California for processing while the team sleeps. By morning, the results are ready.
The data just came back, and what we're seeing here in these slices is some straight lines, and they're coming at right angles. The only thing that these could be is potential lines.
Joel hands the data over to cartographer Phil Reeder.
We look for all the existing maps and diagrams. And then what we're able to do is we're able to overlay them on top of each other, get everything in the same scale, and then we can add our data to them.
When the GPR data is matched against the floor plan of the complex from before the war, the team knows exactly where to start.
So the features that we just saw in that image is you can see these right-handed, or basically perpendicular reflections in here. And when we excavated this was the bema, which is the place where you read from the Torah, and so a very sacred place within there. And as we continue and have continued excavating outwards, right, based on these data sets that students have collected, they've presented at conferences, and these are being collated. We give this to the archaeologist, to John Seligman, and he is excavating. And based off these results and the excavations, the mayor of Vilnius has given the complex to the Jewish Association to do with what they want. And the children in the school have moved to another school, and now the Jewish Association is making decisions as we speak with those reparation month funding and seeing what they're going to do at this site. And those are some changes. Without that science, there's no way the bodies and the political entities would have made any changes in these areas. And we are documenting everything. Everything is public, very transparent. People want the data. The data is always available as we go through. But one of the questions is that where are the Jewish population? And during this time period, and when basically the synagogue and you had the big ghettos there were being eliminated, is they were moved out to Ponar. And if you can imagine a nice place to go to where you went for picnics and things like that, this was what Ponar was, right? You were saying you're going to go Ponar, take the stuff for your, for the day or for 2 days, and this was an execution camp. This is where 70 to 100,000 individuals were killed from Vilnius, as well as surrounding areas. One of the largest killings sites before you start getting into the gas chambers. This is the Holocaust by bullets. This is in Eastern Europe, which much of it was hidden. When I talk about this, a lot of people don't know this has ever happened. But we have eyewitnesses, such as the person who wrote it down in their diary, but was so scared that they hid their diary pieces in their garden. And it was retrieved later on as one of the witnesses to this area. Today, we can go to this site. It has got multiple burial sites. This was a Soviet site to begin with. They were going to use it for gas fueling area. And then when the Germans came by and beat the Soviets in this area, they decided to use this area as a killing site very quickly. And so this is what it looks like today. And we can take a look at there, and this is one of these difficult things to do when you do come from, areas such as the Midwest, of how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the reality of these kinds of things happening? And I work with local First Nations massacres in this region as well. And I work in Cyprus dealing with the conflict in that region. And so this is difficult. None of the students have to go to these sites, but it's one of those things we talk about beforehand as we go through, because we use imagery. The Germans were meticulous in photographing their sites. And so we can get access to the photography. LiDAR, which is using light imaging into the surface, and now we can get high resolution imageries of the surface, and we use that to locate areas. We go into areas in these expanding towns that, the ambassadors talk about, and the others were talking about, how it has been advantageous, and these communities are growing, these cities are growing. But do they know where they're growing onto? And we know that in Kyiv, even during the bombing, right, we know that they are moving in and building on top of these massacre sites. And sometimes on accident, right? But in these areas, we come across some of these burial sites. And so we have tried to image into these areas. We use electrical resivity tomography. On this upper one, you can see that pit type of structure. Within there, we can come in with multiple lines and try to pick out exactly where those are. And then we can come in with radar and see how the ground has been cut, usually by humans digging in with shovels and digging these pits. And then when we get into some of the details, we can see how they've been cut. And then we can see the hummocky surface that I've blown up in the bottom here. And these are basically the burials or the bones of, we would calculate 4,000 to 5,000 individuals that have been buried at this site. And our recommendation is, here they are. It is now the Jewish Association's task, right? How are we going to memorialize these individuals? Because we are not going to excavate. It would be against Jewish law to excavate. Here would be that circular feature. We can see how large it is, and it is quite large, right, at this site. This has been picked up. Nova did a show. New York Times picked it up, and once New York Times picks it up, right, it goes everywhere. And this is where students need to learn very, very quickly how to tell their story. What is the narrative? And, the elevator pitch. You got 2-3 minutes to tell your story. And that's a very important skill to be able to learn. We've also worked in communities that there are no Jewish people still living in those areas, but they still are memorializing those locations. There are still individuals who either survived and have living in the United States, or living in South Africa, or living in other countries that say, I want to memorialize my ancestors. And this past year at this site, we had one of the students who had no idea that her great-great-grandparents were buried here. No idea, because that part of the history of the family was gone. And while at the site, she realized that. But the Lost Shuttle program posed this question to us. Here is a synagogue, a stone synagogue. We can't find it. Where is it? Right? And we have a picture of it. And so what we did is we used 1941 Luftwaffe photos and we could locate exactly where they are. And then we used normal Google Earth imagery. And you can see on the right-hand side where we've outlined those exact locations. And this is a market square, right? This is where I believe when we were there last summer, it was Wednesdays and Saturday mornings that everyone would go there and you'd sell your vegetables and wares and things like that in a small town. This is, I would say 2,000-3,000 people living there right now. And so this is what it looked like when we arrived. It's basically just a gravel lot and apartment building there that's looking at that. And you can see the market stalls there and another one here. And here we start our grid. We collect a grid here to try to get 3D imagery, and we're collecting back and forth here. We have some LiDAR here, not LiDAR, but laser leveling to get some topography. And we go back and forth and we're downloading that data, and people are processing the data as we collect more data to see what we see in this area. And all of a sudden, below that gravel surface, we see this feature, right? And we can turn it around and we can take a look at it in that way. And those are walls. We interpret those in walls that are about a foot and a half below the surface. So the synagogue was completely demolished, but they did leave the foundations. You can even see the round pillars here, and that would be part of the bima, right? That we mentioned earlier on, the bima in Vilnius. And so someone found the actual plans for the synagogue, right? That was saved in some kind of archives, and they match one for one. Right. And so now the Lost Shuttle program, who communicates with the local mayor and the community, did this. I had no idea that this was built. And what they did, and this is a Christian community with no Jews living in that community, and they built a market square, then honored the Jews, right, in that community. And now you can see these market squares all behind here. And this is now memorialized, right, at this site. And that's based off work, right, that Chloe did, we all did in the team. And we didn't know until last summer, because I was going to do more work there and take a look at that. And the big thing that we see in Europe right now is that how do we memorialize these sites? What artists are going to be working with these data to memorialize? Do you memorialize on the killing site, or do you memorialize on the in that region? And you need to know where that is. And I'll just finish off with a story that I think is important, that we're often talking about 6 million Jewish individuals. We're talking about Roma. We're talking about undesired, underrepresented populations that were killed. But millions is a big number. But if we turn it down to one person, one student going to university, this is Matilda. Matilda was going to university in Vilnius, which we were just talking about. And her poetry is just being resurrected. And here's a recent book, Poetry of the Holocaust. And this is one of her poems that's in that book, as well as others. And this is a play that's been written about her life that's being performed around Lithuania. And Matilda lived in Rokiškis. She came from a Jewish family. But just like in these regions, it was 40% Jewish, 60% Christian, 50-50, really intertwined for hundreds of years. And so when we get to the site, we can get photos of Matilda. We can see where her dad worked, right? We can get these local things. And this is even her diary. We now have her diary. And where was it hidden in? It was hidden by a priest underneath the altar as a favor to the family. And so the family, as well as another Jewish family in the community, were taken out, and they were killed at this site. And this is the only piece of paper that we got. We believe the family is buried here, right? And so what we did is we used some of the Google Earth imagery, figured out the road, we measured out, taking a look at those areas, and measuring some of those details. Local community came out and said, we'll clear the forest for you. You just tell us where. And we collected a grid on that site. And everyone, multiple groups of students collecting that data. And this was where we would interpret where 8 people would have been buried, the 2 families. And a young girl hiding behind the haystacks in the farmer's field saw where the killings were, and that's where that map comes from. She wrote that down, 50 years later. And because she was too scared to try to deal with that. And so this is our final results. This is what we pass along to the community. The Smithsonian was very interested in this, and Smithsonian did a whole magazine on women in these period, right? And this would be that story, finding her voice. And this is Matilda. And at every site, right, we do a Jewish prayer led by Dr. Richard Freund, who's also a rabbi, and take a look at these sites and pass along what we can. Richard passed away last year. Cancer reoccurred, and we are continuing this project in his honor, as well as the honor of the millions that have been killed in this area. Because I think what it comes down to, it's not a matter of hundreds of thousands of people buried at these sites. Every individual is worth memorializing. As one of the rabbis of Warsaw mentioned, doesn't matter. We got to memorialize every single person that was killed, be they Roma, be they intelligentsia, be they whatever in these areas. And so what one student did that it was so impactful, right? She read through the translations and she wanted it written in Lithuania, and she had it tattooed on her of saying, I am like Matilda, right? I'm 19 years old. I'm a writer, just like Matilda. And so this is the least I can do moving forward. And that student is a journalist and continuing to write stories about this, like a lot of different students are. So if people are interested, there's lots of data sets. There's lots of information out there. And what I'm trying to do is write, image, and assess these destroyed Holocaust infrastructure. All these sites were given to us by local Jewish communities, and they're the ones that are interested in memorializing their history and letting people know about it. Thank you very much.